Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Byte-size Opinions. My name is Vlad and I'm your host for today. And with me we have Natalie. Welcome, Natalie.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm great. I'm looking forward to hear your opinions and your verdicts on a bunch of topics.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Now, Natalie is a software engineering professional with nearly 2 decades of experience in software program, product, and engineering management, which is really important. Her expertise spans across technical leadership, strategic planning, and hands on engineering, specializing in enterprise web systems and tools. When she's not leading engineering teams to build amazing stuff, she can be found traveling the world, finding new wineries to enjoy, and hanging out with her husband and fur baby. She has a 13-year-old Frenchie who's traveled to 3 countries already. What a life for some people. What can I say?
I think my dog's been more places than most Americans, honestly.
Oh, that may be true. All right. Now, are you ready for the first topic for today?
Yes, let's go.
All right. Now, TDD, task driven development. What do you think about it?
I think it's a bit overrated. I like the fact that TDD does ensure that every feature function has an associated test. It does enforce kind of the agile concept of code as documentation. Unfortunately, though, in my experience, while I feel like the philosophy behind it is good, in
Mhm.
practice, it is difficult to really implement reliably. I think mainly due to pressure on developers to deliver and deliver quickly. And test driven development enforces the fact that we have to write our tests up front and make sure that those are all working and getting to green. And I think there can be a perception of a lot of overhead with that. And so in practice, um, actually, I might change that to maybe as being underrated rather than overrated because of those things. But yeah,
Wonderful. This is the first in this show, changing mine exactly during the why
as I
for
was
me,
speaking
which
it
is
out, I was like, well, I don't think that's really overrated. I think that's more, I think it's being underrated just because of the constraints around its usage.
mhm, mhm. So if you're an engineering manager and let's say you have full autonomy, you can make any kind of choices. Would you enforce TDD? Would you, I don't know, let's say promote it and present it as an option and let the team choose, or don't even mention it and see if it comes up naturally?
I would present it as an option, and to have a discussion with the team as to, I think people have their different thoughts and pros and cons around it. As I said, the thing that I like most about it is that it enforces that everything we create, every feature, every function has an associated test, and it guarantees solid test coverage of what we're producing. But there's other ways to go about that as well, right? And so it's not the only solution. So I like the idea of presenting it as one solution, but
Mhm.
definitely it would be in an overall concept of we want to ensure we have accurate test coverage, thorough test coverage with whatever we're building.
All right. And you mentioned the concept behind TDD, which is related to the next topic, which is
Hmm.
Scrum, which also has another concept behind it. What do you think about Scrum?
Now, Scrum, I do think is a bit overrated, mainly because I really feel that um, I've seen it be used either in an overly prescriptive way or not prescriptive enough. And I think what people forget about frameworks like Scrum or Kanban or these sorts of things is that they are a framework, it's a scaffolding in which to implement agile practices. And I think with that, on the overly prescriptive side, I've seen Scrum be used. People become very stringent in its implementation and they forget about the core principles of Agile, right? Like, let's talk to our customers, let's collaborate together as a team, Let's have documentation, not no documentation, right? So in the Agile Manifesto, it's one over the other, but not negating the other. And I think sometimes in Scrum, people go a little too far and they become very laser focused on the framework versus the general concepts around Agile development as a whole. On the other side of that, I've also seen people use Scrum very, very loosely, right? And not be prescriptive enough. And so kind of like, sometimes we do burn down, sometimes we don't. Sometimes, we want to have more of a Kanban structure and sometimes we don't. So I've seen that as well. And I think that I think the use of it does become overrated and like just this kind of idea of, oh, we're using Scrum and so we're doing Agile. And I don't think that that's always the case.
What's the disadvantage when, for the second example, when people were loosely using it? What were the disadvantages in that type of scenario?
I think there can be some convoluted experiences around the processes, a misunderstanding around what the processes are for, different ceremonies are for, a lackluster, laissez-faire attitude towards, say, doing a retrospective at the end of every sprint. Oh, we don't have time for those. What's the benefit of doing that, right? So I've seen that happen. And I think that's just lack of understanding or education around what those benefits are for those certain ceremonies and why they exist as part of that framework.
I see. Okay. Got it. Would you say, so you mentioned processes, and usually there's more emphasis on processes in bigger companies,
Yeah.
less so in startups. And this very nicely slides us into our next topic, which is working at a startup as a
Mhm.
software engineer.
Right. So for working as a startup, I think that it's kind of underrated, at least in my experience and people I've worked with in the industry. I think that there's this big goal to work at the big main companies, Meta, Apple, Amazon, and like get that job. And it has its place, but I think you sort of miss out on the value of working at a startup. To me personally, I think the pay can be quite good, but also you're going to learn a lot and you're going to be able to provide an immense amount of value and impact at a startup, much more so than you would at a larger company. I myself have worked at both startups and at large companies. I started my career at Microsoft. Um, and again, both have value, but I think the startup gets underrated in favor of the larger company,
Mhm.
especially among younger engineers, people right out of college. They really want to get that prestige of, oh, I'm working at Netflix or Amazon. But you do sort of just become, for lack of a better way to say it, almost like a code monkey or a cog in the wheel, and you don't really have that exposure that you would get, I think, at a smaller company, a startup, and the learnings and the value that you'd be able to add that come along with that.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. And so, in essence, there's not really a wrong choice. So you could go either to big ones or to a startup. You could end up at a startup which 6 months from when you started crashes and burns, and you still have to start all over again. That's the risk of a startup.
True. True.
But tell me if I'm wrong. I guess your message could be that don't focus so much on the big guys, and don't maybe, I don't know, lose motivation just because you couldn't get there, because there are other places just as well. They're different, but you can do a lot of cool things in other places
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. I mean, as far as the risk factor, I think that people think about it with the startup. Frankly, I don't think you're taking much less of a risk going for a larger company, right? I think, we've all heard that they've had mass layoffs and things like that. So I think the attitude more is you're going to always be learning, upgrading your skill set and looking for that next level, that next thing at that next company, right? We all know now we don't go into companies or into an environment and think, oh, I'm here for 20 years. Those days don't exist anymore, right? So that idea of, oh, I'm more secure at a larger company versus a startup, I think that's a thin line, maybe, kind of, but not
Yeah.
always, right? So it's, I guess I think just, person to person has to weigh what their risk tolerance is. There are things at startups that are gonna be a little bit more chaotic, like the processes we were talking about before, right? They're startups. They're gonna wear a lot of hats, and there are gonna be processes that are not in place yet that maybe you as the new person in the startup can actually help implement. That's part of that learning and value add, right?
Yeah.
Where at a larger company, that's set. Like you're in it, you're working through that. There's not a lot of room, and they do kind of become that large ship. It's hard to change course, right? So
Hmm. Makes sense. Speaking of things that were in place 20 years ago and not now, let's talk about a new technology that wasn't 20 years ago, which is Web3.
yeah, Web3. I think it's a little overrated, to be honest. I think the concept that has come about with Web3 around decentralized apps and networks and blockchain technology that adds, added security for handling data and transactions and data ownership. And all of that is very alluring, very alluring. It's a very alluring um, concept. I think it has a tremendous amount of, how do I want to say, a lot of challenges to overcome before
Mm.
there's a lot of adoption with it, which is why I consider it a bit overrated right now, right? There's issues with scaling, performance. There's a lot of costs. There's a steep learning curve to it. There's legal risks. It's not very well regulated. And so it's lacking a lot of adoption for these reasons. And I think right now, um, that's the challenge. Using that blockchain technology, there's just a lot of things to overcome before more businesses are going to be willing to really take on the Web3 as a standard for what they're going to utilize when they're building their apps or networks or things like that.
So, working at a big company and working at a startup now in these days, the risk factor is sort of similar considering everything that's happened in the market. But what about working at a startup in Web3?
Yeah, I mean, that's a choice that founder would make. And I know that there are some startups doing that, but and I'll be transparent. I did some research on that before our talk here because I have not personally worked in Web3. But I
Mhm.
was curious, how many startup small businesses are utilizing Web3, and there aren't that many for the challenges that I just mentioned and others, right? And so I found that quite interesting, right? And that is why I kind of concluded that I think it's a bit overrated right now because I think it has a long way to go. Not a lot of people are adopting it except for those niche kind of startups that are like, oh, I want to do something with blockchain technology, right? There's not a lot of it out there.
Yeah. I gotta say, you gotta love the people who do their research. Okay, now moving on to the next topic, which is popular these days, AI replacing software engineers.
Yeah. So I actually just finished a course called Advanced AI for um, product managers and engineering leaders. Really fascinating course. Um, and really, what I came out of that was I think if you learn even just generally about large language models and machine learning, you come to understand that AI is not going to be replacing software engineers, just like all other technology. The field is going to evolve, right? And so what we do today, a lot of AI will take over, right? Like a lot of the more menial things I can see AI doing, but that just means the role of a software engineer is just going to change and evolve. And of course, as any software engineer will tell you and you will know, we always are learning, right? We're always
Yeah.
growing. We have to always advance in our technology anyway. And this can be seen from, the beginning of Web 2.0, and then we had, the web platform builders and then Web 3. And during each one of these evolutions, what have we been told? That's the end of web developers. They're not going to exist anymore. But they're still here. I'm one of them. So it's just the whole role in the industry changes, right? And you just adapt to that. And so I don't think AI presents any really much different of a challenge. We will utilize it, and how we utilize it will change what we do, but I don't think it's going to replace. That's my.
Would you think that the AI systems will evolve and reach a, let's say, performance level which is similar to a junior developer, and maybe there'll be companies which will prefer to hire somebody to use an AI rather than hire a junior?
I think it's certainly possible, but I think it's really hard to say right now, right? Like, I think that's what I mean by our role will evolve, right? What we see as a junior dev right now is going to probably look different in the future, because as you're saying, AI maybe, that's what I meant by like some of those more menial tasks, more of those junior tasks, right? AI will probably do those. But then what does that mean to be a junior developer? I don't know the answer to that question. I just think that it's just going to look different than what it looks like today. Just like junior developers look different 20 years ago than they do today, right? We have so many libraries and, NPM packages and things that we can use just out of the box, so we don't have to, do low-level coding, right? Back in the day, people had to do a lot of low-level coding. So what does that mean, right? I don't know for sure, but I think it'll just mean that it's going to look different, of course.
That's a good question, and maybe one future topic in this podcast. Who knows?
Yeah.
All right. Let's move on to the next subject: pair programming.
This one I put is just about right. For me personally, I find that there is a tremendous amount of value in it, especially if you're doing it with, a senior and junior person. I think that there's value there, especially in my experience when I was more junior. I had the benefit of working in a paired programming situation, was able to learn a tremendous amount. At the same time, it can be very nerve-wracking, especially for people like me who are quite introverted. And I just really, having to I feel like you sort of have to put yourself out there in a way that at first might seem uncomfortable, especially if you don't know the person you're pairing with very well, if you're new to the company. There's a lot of, I think, emotional hurdles to get over, especially if you are a developer that's been used to just being kind of my own solo thing and hammering stuff out and then throwing it out. Like pair programming, it can be uncomfortable. And so I think because of that, there's this kind of tug of war. I've seen that on my own teams, right? Where we've asked people to pair program, there can be a resistance of like, oh, I don't want to do that, And then there's others that are like, no, this is great because they've had the experience. So I think if you can get over that hurdle, it's a good thing to do to help grow each other and grow the team.
What could you do as an engineering manager to make it easier for newcomers, for those who haven't experienced pair programming, to be more open and relaxed about it?
I really like how when I first did pair programming, how it was presented to me. And I think I would do something similar, which was, I was very resistant, but I was told, we're not here to criticize you. Give it a try. Try it for a day or two with this. It was a senior engineer I was working with. I knew him, but not very well. And I was told, if you really dislike it, we'll have a chat and we'll see what other direction we can go. It wasn't like, oh, this is what you're going to do from now, right? Like just give it a try. And that helped me ease into it. And then I had a really great person that I paired with, right? They were very, very understanding and kind and supportive. And because I went into it thinking like, I'm just going to be criticized, And I think we all sort of feel that way at some level. And it wasn't like that at all. It was, like I said, very supportive and kind, and I got to learn a lot of things, and I ended up enjoying it, right? And
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
it worked out. And I think that I would approach it very similarly with a teammate, a direct report that had a similar um, resistance to it. In fact, I'd probably share my story with them, right? Because I think, I could offer them, like, look, I've been there, and I know like it can be really scary, but let's give it a go, and if it doesn't work, we'll chat about it.
Very nice. Very nice. Okay, now, next topic. It's about a social platform called LinkedIn.
Ah, yes, LinkedIn. LinkedIn, I think, is a bit underrated still. Um,
Mm.
and reason being is I think that there's a lot of room there to use it as more of a branding and networking portal. I think a lot of people, and this may be just me, but a lot of people use it as kind of a job search engine, right? And
Yeah.
not so much to write a lot of posts about their own thought leadership. I'm seeing more of that out there. Um, but I think it can be better utilized, as we grow in our career to kind of establish ourselves as thought leaders in what we're doing by putting out, our ideas around different technologies or things we've learned um, or beliefs we have around different processes, whatever, what have you, right? And so
Yeah.
um, and I see that a little bit, but it's definitely not like your other social medias, right? So I know myself have also been a little resistant to that because, again, just maybe that introversion and being an engineer, I don't think like our whole thing is to be out there posting content. So it's a bit of a different mind shift, but I also understand that if you do, it can have benefits in that people get to know you. They see your face, they see how you think and what you do, and then they'll start reaching out and saying, "Hey, I saw this post and it really resonated with me." And have you ever thought about maybe coming to work here? And that's always kind of the ideal, right? So
Yeah.
we use for that more.
I've heard of people who use it as a way to gather knowledge, to read
Mhm.
informative posts from others and get new ideas or even new programming techniques or whatever. Um, and I've also heard people, myself included, um, being forced to write, to
Mm,
express yourself in writing,
yeah.
which helped structuring your ideas and your thoughts, and
Mhm.
that moved on to other things as well.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Have you found a job through LinkedIn?
Via that kind of self-branding aspect of it.
Not necessarily, like a job searching platform, let's say.
I'm trying to think. I don't think my last few jobs have occurred because of or through LinkedIn. So no.
Hmm.
I am using it currently though. So
Maybe.
maybe. Crossing fingers, you never know.
Yes, yes. Okay. Now, what do you think about having a mentor?
um, I think it can be good. I think you have to be clear on what you are wanting out of that relationship, right? So, and what I often believe the best mentor mentee relationships are a two-way street, right? And so, are you able to offer something as well? Working with that mentor, are there, it goes into that whole concept of give before you get, right? And I'm not sure how you really like if you're looking for a mentor, you obviously want somebody to help teach you things, but I think that there's just maybe some gratitude or some offering of like, hey, if there's anything I can do for you in the future, right? Like not just going into it of a give me, give me, give me kind of attitude.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then as I said, understanding like what are you really looking for in that mentorship, right? Being clear on that. I think if you go into a mentorship just sort of like, hey, I need a mentor, it's going to be very unstructured and like what's the value that you're going to get out of it and that they're going to get.
Right. But don't you think that maybe if you go into this general, I need a mentor, wouldn't it be possible for the mentor to work together with you and figure out what is it that you actually need?
If I think to myself about somebody coming to me, for instance,
Hmm.
I've been
Hmm.
in the industry for 20 years, right? And they're like, Natalie, would you mind mentoring me? One of my first questions is probably going to be, sure, absolutely. But what do you need? Like, where do you want to go? Like,
Right.
do you have some idea of like, are you trying to get from this level to this level? Do you need help in a certain, you know, programming stack? Like, what is it that you're actually looking for? Because otherwise,
Hmm.
I'm like, I don't know, like we're just gonna have a chit chat, which is fine too, but I don't know what value I'm gonna provide, right? And so having at least some direction of what you're looking for, I think
Hmm.
is helpful.
Hmm. Hmm. Makes sense. Okay. Um, Book clubs. What do you think about book clubs?
Um, I'm not typically part of book clubs. I read a lot of books, but yeah, I guess I don't think much of much of them because I've never really joined any. What I do appreciate, I don't really consider them book clubs, but I do appreciate book recommendations from people, right? And so I've been on
Okay.
like Slack cohorts or things where there's, you know, channels where people talk about books or they recommend books. I don't really think
Hmm.
of that as a book club per se, but I do enjoy that because I do get a lot of good ideas of like, ooh, that sounds interesting. I'm looking
Hmm.
for something about, for instance, like leadership, or, I've been thinking about I want to improve here. Somebody says, oh, here's a good book on time management. This did a lot for me. I'll look into it, right? I think that those are helpful, but um, I don't know. I don't really join book clubs very much.
Okay. Now we're jumping back into tech and speaking about Dora metrics.
Durametrics. I'm not familiar with that term.
Um, well, lead time, cycle time,
Oh,
and
okay.
stuff like
Yeah,
that.
for sure, for sure. Is that
Underrated, overrated?
um I think I would put that as just about right. I think understanding your cycle time, or to me throughput, really is what I like to focus on a lot.
Hmm. Hmm.
Understanding how long it takes for your team to, from the time, they've got the requirements and they start the feature to it being delivered to a point where it's out there and it provides value, right? Like that
Right.
amount of time. Because at the end of the day, anything we do, if it doesn't provide value, it's not
It's
worth anything,
waste.
right? Yeah. And so
Hmm.
I very strongly feel that understanding your throughput, how long it takes your team to get from beginning to value, is very important, because from there you can effectively communicate to your senior leadership, your product manager, whoever is interested in, like, say, I have this feature and it's gonna, you measure it out and say it's gonna be like this amount of story points. Um, if you know how long it takes your team to provide an X amount of story point in value every sprint, then you can calculate based on that out however many sprints it's going to take for that entire feature to be released. And that's valuable information to be able to effectively communicate to your product manager, to your senior leadership, who, of course, are always wanting to know how long is it going to take for this thing to reach our users, right? So, from that perspective, I think having a solid understanding of the timeline that it takes to deliver is really important.
Hmm. 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 All right. One more topic in this first round, which is women in tech.
Women in tech. Oh, let's see. Well, I think I'm going to say that's underrated. And a lot of it, I still believe, and again, I've been in this industry for almost 20 years, and I still don't see a lot of women. And there's just not a lot of us here. Um, and some of that I still think there's is the lack of representation, but I also think that there's just what do I want to say, a perception problem, right? I think that a lot of young women may find the tech careers, maybe too nerdy or too not as creative or
Hmm.
uh, just things that in my experience I have found to be really generally false. But there's just still this PR problem. I think,
Yeah.
especially for young girls, right? Or that you're going to need a significant amount of math, and unfortunately, I think girls get told a lot that they're not good at math, right? And so that they won't be good at this. And I think that there's just a lot of social image
Hmm.
issues that deter women from going into tech. And I've
You,
always felt, me as a woman in tech, the best thing I can do is try and just be that kind of example of somebody who's gone into tech, who, you know, I like to go wine tasting, and I'm not like, I don't feel like I'm not a gamer or anything like that. Like, I think that and not that there's anything wrong with that. I think that people have their different ways of being, but I feel like that's always a focus, and there's less of a focus on just being like a non-math whiz, tech nerd who's in the industry and actually enjoys it. And I also, by the way, think it's very creative. I think software development is a hugely creative field. And again, I think there's an image problem with that. I think people
yeah,
don't know that it is, and it very much is. Very much is.
I completely agree. And I think that you said that it's a PR issue, sort of. Yes, I completely agree. It's about perspective and what society tells you or communicates you, maybe indirectly, about that field, which is not very accurate,
Correct.
indeed.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's my feeling.
All right, thank you. So this was the first round, and the second one is coming right up. It's called rapid fire round.
I
We're
feel like
just
I'm on a
going
game
through,
show.
yeah, kind of. We're going through a bunch of topics, and you're going to say underrated, overrated, just about right, and you also have the option to skip if it's something that you don't have a lot of experience with.
Okay.
Okay, so Docker,
Hmm. Just about right.
TypeScript,
Hmm. Well, just about right. It's, yeah, maybe underrated.
cloud certifications,
Cloud certifications. Yeah, skip. I'm not very familiar.
open source software,
Oh, just about right.
domain driven development,
Let's skip that one.
mechanical keyboards,
Mechanical keyboards. Let's skip that one.
remote work,
Oh, I think that's highly underrated.
story points,
Oh, overrated.
developer experience,
Hmm. Just about right.
standing desks,
I'm gonna skip that one. I'm not a standing desk person, so I'm not sure if I have a basis of comparison there.
career breaks,
Underrated.
VC funding,
Overrated.
tech accelerators.
Overrated.
And that's it. We've reached the end of the rapid fire round. That wasn't so hard, was it? You can pick, if you like, you can pick one of the topics from this rapid fire round and expand on it.
I would like to pick remote work. I
Okay,
think
great.
Yeah, and the reason I said it's underrated is mainly because there's such a push, especially by large companies, to bring people back to the office. And so, from that perspective, I think they are underrating the value of remote work, both from their people health perspective, climate health perspective, and productivity. I think there's a huge, seemingly unfounded, I will say, argument that people are more productive when they're in the office. I've been a remote worker since 2016, and I completely disagree with that sentiment. I think I think that I'm in fact way more distracted at the office. And I want to say, while I'm saying this, I'm not saying there's not value in face to
Mhm.
face communication or meeting up with your team. There absolutely is value, but I do not believe that that needs to be on a daily, even weekly basis, right? Like, I think getting together as a team once a quarter, brainstorming, having a week long session together, amazing stuff, right? You can get a lot of value out of that. Does that mean people need to go back to the office on a daily basis and commute to work and miss time with their kids, miss time with their, husband, wife, family, whatever, doing the things they love that does ultimately make them more productive, happier at work, have a happier work-life balance? Um, no, I don't think that the sacrifice is worth it. And so for me, I am really very passionate about the ability to be able to work from home, work remotely, while also adding, I think, a tremendous amount more value to any company that I work for because I get to do that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, welcome to Team Remote Work. I'm part of that team as well. I'm also a big fan. I have no idea in which year I started doing it on a, let's say, a full-time basis, but nevertheless, it feels like years and years and years, and I love it. But I also, at least in the past years, I also started to appreciate more the social aspect and the importance and the value of that as well. At the beginning, I was strictly, no, I don't need to see you. I don't need to talk to you. I can whatever. But
Right.
now I adjusted my perspective, and you can get, let's say, both in a way, but not
Yeah.
a forced hybrid. Come to the office in these days and this day,
Right.
whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a hugely important distinction is that remote work doesn't necessarily mean I never see anybody. Right. And I
Hmm.
think that
Hmm.
for some reason people have considered that to be the case. And I think it is important. You have to have that FaceTime, but it doesn't have to be on a mandated schedule for sure.
Yeah, probably a PR issue, another PR issue,
Yeah.
just like before. All right, Natalie. So thank you very much for your input, your expertise that you've showcased, and you let us know your ideas around the startups and the way of working and everything. And